Hello and welcome to the Stories of Innovation, a podcast by World Vision International Nepal. I'm your host, Utsub Karel. In this first episode of Stories of Innovation, we'll be talking around investing in innovation with Professor Tim Gocher, OBE. He is CEO, founder, and director of Dolma Impact Fund, which is an international investment fund, and it has been creating quite a lot of jobs and business in Nepal. So Tim, welcome to Stories of Innovation.
Thank you.
So we have heard quite a lot of inspiring stories about, like Dolma Impact Fund, a lot of investment, what you have been doing. So I was wondering, what is the story behind Dolma Impact Fund?
Well, there is a predecessor to Dolma Impact Fund, and it was Dolma Foundation.
Right.
And that was started in 2003. It's a British non-profit organization.
Right.
Which was inspired by a visit I had to the Rasua and Langtang district, which was my first trip to Nepal. So that's 19 years ago.
Wow.
And that still does sponsor education for the poorest children with disabilities, and is extremely active during crises like COVID-19 and the earthquake. So I was involved in Nepal, and of course I've been involved in Nepal through marriage for 15 years this year.
Oh, that's amazing. So you have got Nepal connection, and it's work as well as with the family as well.
Absolutely. So we've got very close ties to Nepal. I know I look and sound British, but really I feel at least half Nepali.
Half Nepali, right? And you're perfectly kind of full Nepali, by the way. Right. So also, since you had intensive work experience with JP Morgan, with Deloitte Finance, and, you had your different kind of successful businesses as well. So what is the story behind Dolma Impact Fund? Like, why Nepal? Why not London? Why not New York? Why not Frankfurt?
I guess every decision is a combination of external and internal factors.
Right.
The external factor was the rise of impact investment, and not in Nepal, but in other countries, especially India and Africa. So I was able to look at other models. The internal decision was much more about what impact am I having on humanity, on people, individuals, when I'm doing a finance job. If I'm behind a desk in Singapore, in New York, in London, which I have been, it's very hard to see. And I'm financing a shopping mall, a car leasing company. It could be anything. And so I think inside me, especially since I started Dolma Foundation, was able to travel. It was a weird world I was living. I was 1 minute in Singapore doing a big multi-million-dollar deal.
Right.
And the next minute I'm in a village in Rasua.
Wow.
And over time, it was quite difficult for me to justify, not that there was anything bad that I was doing in finance, but to justify that I didn't have visibility on the end human result of the work I was doing. And so that was the moral dilemma, if you like, that led me to want to put my skills in finance towards something which hopefully would benefit humanity.
So what was your aha moment about the impact investment? Like, what triggered you, basically? I'm sure you're sitting in a really fancy office and then, okay, now I have to start doing something new. So what is that aha moment or something?
Not really. I mean, the aha moment, it came gradually. It came through a love of this country.
Right.
And more involvement. And really, probably it was the peace accord was the aha moment. So I'd been thinking, I'm not a charity person. Of background, I'm a finance person, but that's impossible during, the Maoist troubles.
True.
But the peace accord in 2006 made me start thinking, and as the success, I do see that as, one of the most successful peace agreements.
Right.
I'm actually born in Northern Ireland, which is also, it's got its troubles at the moment, but is also one of the most successful in terms of the war has stopped and has still stopped. And I think Nepal's peace accord ranks up there. And as that became more developed, as that was less and less likely to slip back into conflict, the aha moment became an implementable idea.
Okay, that's brilliant. So you're in the space of impact investment, and this is something which has been gaining momentum in the last 20 years. I was checking some of the reports, and like now it's almost like $500 billion asset kind of thing. So what is impact investment for a beginner like me?
Yeah, it's very difficult to define in one thing, but I think because there's lots of different forms of it. So let's try to put some structure to the categories of it. Impact investment is anything that achieves a social or environmental good while getting your money back, at least. Okay, so there are some funds set up, especially in more developed markets, where actually just getting your principal back, but achieving those ends would be a great result. And often they're called impact first funds. Okay. In our case, we would call ourselves a finance first. In other words, the variables that's most important to us is the financial return, but we're going to invest in a country, in sectors which, if those companies are successful, it will have a positive social outcome, and we will measure those. So those would be, in our case, we measure variables like employment, CO2 avoided, taxes paid, obviously money invested. And, it's therefore you're measuring the outcome of hopefully a successful commercial business rather than telling the commercial business which social variables to focus on.
So it's beyond profit. So it's all about people as well and planet as well, right?
Yes, but so every impact investor is different. Let me tell you what our impact goals are. You should see Dolma Impact Fund as a normal commercial private equity venture capital fund manager. And our goal at the micro level is to increase employment, is to build renewable energy, is to invest in hospitals. Obviously, all of those have. But our much bigger macro goal is to post a rate of return on our investments that makes Nepal attractive to other investors. I think that's the biggest impact we can have. According to the government, I think in energy alone, they wish to raise $10 billion from foreign investors, mostly over the next 5 years. Well, if you look at foreign direct investment at the moment, it's about $150 million a year. So that's got to go up to $2 billion a year.
Absolutely.
And for that to happen, Nepal needs a track record of institutional investors like Dolma that have invested, sold their shares, made money, so that is de-risked in their perception. So for us to make a return, we don't know what that is, right? We don't know what that percentage IRR is today, but it's more than India. Right. So whatever the average private equity return in India is, then we would have to post more than that, because Nepal would be seen as riskier than India, to compensate an investor for the risk they're taking in Nepal.
Wow. So the market is kind of infant right now, especially after the, like the whole peace process we went through, especially in Nepal. So this thing is in uncharted territory, right? So it's basically you're trying to innovate something in this space.
Sure, but it's come a long way since our first fund in 2014. So, back then, first of all, who the heck is Dolma? Secondly, what is private equity? What's the interest rate? That's what I was often. Of course, there isn't necessarily an interest rate. You share the risk in the shares of the founders. So now, if you look at the ecosystem of venture capital, private equity, and I'm using those words interchangeably, we've now co-invested in various companies with local or international other investors. BO2 is one of them. They have financing from IFC and the British government. True North Associates, we've just invested in Food Mandu
Right.
alongside IME Group. We have 2 co-investments with, and the last 2 of those are domestic investors. So we're seeing much more of an ecosystem now than there was, say, 8 years ago.
So how was the reaction of, like different local stakeholders when you first came and you said to them, I'm going to do impact investment? Because I'm sure that topic was very new and you had to educate your stakeholders as well. How was that?
It was very difficult, and made more difficult because we started into September 14, and the earthquake came sort of 7 months later.
Oops.
So we had a few early deals. Obviously, for a long time, people were not focusing on business, and neither were we.
Right.
But we did. Our first deal was a hydro.
Right.
So if you like our first deal, yes, it was pioneering foreign direct investment in hydro,
Right.
in a private equity structure. But there had been many investors in hydro. So we were only changing one thing, was the foreign bit.
Right.
And then we went on to do deals in healthcare, technology, and gradually we learned and the market learned, the sort of language that we speak.
Right. So what are some of the enabling factor for you to, because you have been investing quite a lot, especially the Impact Fund, even you have started to invest in artificial intelligence, right, with Fuse machines. So the whole idea about democratizing the AI, especially in the development world, Cloud Factory, like in the healthcare you talked about. So what do you think is really that one enabling factor, or maybe multiple one, that really moves you to, okay, I'll invest more, or I want other people to invest as well?
The team.
Okay.
And I don't think any venture capitalist around the world would give you, I don't think that there's anything unique in Nepal about the most important factor. It is first the honesty and integrity of the team.
Right.
It is the drive and the vision. And probably third comes the business model.
Right.
I mean, you're going to take risks you don't know, especially if it's a tech business model.
Absolutely.
Yes, if it's a hydro plant, you can probably foresee it. But especially in tech, where the business model itself is either new or certainly new to Nepal, you're taking a risk, but you're really taking a risk on, do I believe that, because that business plan is not going to stay the same.
True.
We're going to invest for 3, 5, 7 years. The markets, the technology is changing so fast that what you see in front of you is not where that business is going to end up. So the constant in that are the founders, the management, other stakeholders, and whether you believe they can overcome the hurdles and move as quickly as the market and the technology moves.
So one of the big answers is team, right?
It's the answer.
It's the answer. So we talked about the enabling factor. What about the challenges? Because this is a very developing economy, right? And there are a lot of things that needs to be done. And you were one of the pioneer of FDI in Nepal, right? And what were the major challenges you faced during this, I would say, interesting journey?
I mean, it's the difficulty of doing business,
Right.
and the difficulty of any approval from government that you need, whether it's as simple as bringing money in the country,
Right.
Or getting licenses for a hospital, or regulatory licenses, approvals, anything. And that was not a surprise. So I don't think that. I was not green. I had been doing business, albeit non-profit business, in Nepal
Right.
for 11 years before we started the first private equity fund. So I knew that was the case. But I think alongside those difficulties comes a market which is relatively untapped, and a market where entrepreneurship was incredible. I think.
Right.
Let me say what I mean about that.
Okay.
Entrepreneurs in Nepal are, not only is this recent wave of tech entrepreneurship coming through, but you've seen people who ran businesses during a war. You've seen people run businesses during an earthquake with no electricity,
True.
right? When I went to business school, I wasn't taught risk management at that kind of level.
Right.
So there's a resilience here, which is it's one of the fundamental factors of entrepreneurial success is how do I deal with setbacks? So whether that setback is a delayed government license or an earthquake, I see people here, and we invest in people here who overcome those kind of things. So there was sort of this environment where if you could add both capital and some of the corporate governance and skills of running businesses, that hopefully those companies could really lift off. And in some cases, that's definitely come true.
Right, because here we say, like, when we have to deal with the challenges, we need to be street smart, right? So you need to be open to everything, and you need to, and I'm sure, like, since you said you are like half Nepali already, so you now know how to deal with the risk. So I think that's amazing. So since we are talking about all the amazing investment you are doing in the tech sector as well as some of the traditional bits as well, so like how these emerging technologies, let's say like artificial intelligence, blockchain, IoT, are going to be really, really important in terms of solving some of the pressing issues, like, let's say, unemployment, poverty, like access to quality education, access to good health system, like, because since we always try to find the idea around, okay, what is that light bulb thing which really helps us to disrupt and then try to solve the challenges. So since you have been investing quite a lot around it, so I was wondering, like, if you could share like some of your thoughts around, 'cause these are the emerging technologies, and these can be really, really critical in terms of solving some of the pressing issues what the society is facing right now, especially in a country like Nepal.
Sure. There are two big effects which AI, cloud computing, IoT, just take, digital technology as a whole will have. One is on employment and prosperity by Nepalis providing those services as technologists. And the other is the effect that those technologies will have on the population. So let's sort of break that down. In terms of the effect on employment and prosperity, two of our investments, Cloud Factory and Fuse Machines, really give a great example. They have proven to me that because of technology, because of the cloud, there is really no difference between having a company in California or Kathmandu. The brains are the same, right? Both of those companies, by the way, are providing AI services to mainly the US and the EU, to major enterprise customers.
Right.
And so Cloud Factory is working more on the data management for AI algorithms. Fuse Machines is working more on the high-end software engineering of AI algorithms. So they're providing different services, but fundamentally they're selling Nepali talent to international enterprise clients. Now, those two companies together employ about 4,300 people in Nepal.
Wow.
And most of that from Cloud Factory, because it's data work instead of that high-end sort of software engineer. But they're both extremely successful. Now, the level playing field is in terms of infrastructure. The level playing field in terms of education is the one gap that we see, right? So as long as I've got internet and power, and probably I can speak English, I can work for Cloud Factory if I've got the right dedication. What I may not have is the right education, and that's especially true the higher up you go. So if you're, what Fuse Machines have done is they have a training program for 1 year, which takes computer science graduates from Nepal, and it trains them to the level. The founder, Samir Maski, is a PhD from Columbia University in New York. And so he's got an online and partially in-person course which bridges that gap. And so if you can bridge the education gap, you have a level playing field. And It's worth noting that this is the first time in human history that the real developing frontier markets have a level playing field with Western or more emerging markets. And the reason for that is, in all other industrial revolutions past, you have needed in physical infrastructure in order to compete. So whether that's steam engines in the 18th century, obviously they were mostly in Britain, Western Europe, America, whether it was railways, whether it's in the more recent manufacturing revolution. It's unlikely to see Nepal becoming a powerhouse if you have to build your own diesel generators, the roads break half the deliveries, the water supply is. It makes the hurdles so big that you're unlikely to scale. With technology, what they sometimes call the fourth industrial revolution or the digital revolution, there really is a level playing field as long as you can fill that education gap. And I think this is the moment where what has been since that first industrial revolution, when human inequality actually began, right? Before that, we were all farmers.
True.
Then you started to see this Western dominance, and you started to see more and more wealth coming to the West, and you started to see, what was called the first world and the third world.
Right.
Okay. If we ignore this opportunity now, if we don't invest in the technology talent, in the education, if we can't overcome these perceptions that, Nepal or sub-Saharan Africa is too risky, we are going to miss the opportunity to drive better human equality globally. And this is a massive thing. It's something I speak about at universities. So, this Cloud Factory Fuse Machine, Sastadil, Upaya, these are all part of a revolution, which we're in the middle of. And I think we should all be aware of that. Let me just touch on, you asked about what would be the benefit to society, healthcare, banking, etc. Well, obviously, I think Nepal is unlikely to sprout the next Google. The fundamental intellectual property that, say, an AI algorithm for healthcare is unlikely to be the intellectual property from Nepal. Could be. I'd love to find it. And if you know who it is, please introduce them to us. But I think what will happen is, as, say, Fuse Machines Cloud Factory work with American pioneers to develop, say, AI technology that can scan multiple lung x-rays, multiple EKG reports, so that you can start to get preventative medicine, that you can start to apply AI to healthcare, AI to banking and risks of investment, risks of loans, etc. So I think those waves will come as part of the global benefit of technology.
So, I find this new emerging technology is really incredible, especially I was going through this company called Credo Lab, which is really, really trying to help those people who do not have access to finance, because in the West, we have got the credit score and the bank will know whether to give you money or not. But here, especially if you look into a country like Nepal, where half of the female do not have good access to credit, and that is really hindering the entrepreneurial spirit of female, right? And they're making a massive difference in the community, especially in health, education, looking after the family. So I was going through how that works, and they were actually reading the mobile information, the SMS you send, your battery level, if you do not charge battery on time, that means you are likely to default, right? Or how often you call the family members. So there are so many fascinating things happening, right? So as you rightly say that this is the kind of a fourth industrial revolution, and Nepal is not that far behind other part of other thing that was happening. So I'm really excited about this thing. A lot of innovation is happening even in developing countries, and the way you talked about how the tech companies are creating new jobs, they're trying to solve the problem related to society. I think that's really, really fantastic. Now, since you briefly touched upon IP and commercialization part of the IP as well, and I know you have got a lot of experience lecturing as well as writing papers and working in this area. So what are the challenges developing countries like Nepal has on the intellectual property issue? Because now we are looking into the new breed of business, new business models, new technologies, and these are really, really incredible ideas that needs to be protected. And since you have been investing quite a lot in this area, like what kind of challenges you have seen in these kind of frontier markets?
I mean, obviously the intellectual property protection offered in Nepal is not the same as it would be in the US or any Western market. And of course, there could be improvement in that. I think, though, that we have, identified a real structural problem because Nepal defends a peg to the Indian rupee. Nepali companies and citizens are not allowed to hold companies or shares or bank accounts abroad. But in this world, let's say you're a cloud factory and you need to sell abroad or you need to register intellectual property. You effectively can't. You can't set up a subsidiary in the United States. You're not allowed to. And that would be where you would, of course, have your sales contracts, because here making payments to the US, especially if you're a digital company, paying for licenses, salespeople, queuing up at the central bank. Actually, they did that. They did that first of all. And, they would have defaulted because payments would have been late. And so one of the founders was a Canadian citizen and could set up a UK holding company. Now, that allowed them to register their intellectual property abroad, where you get better protection. It allowed them to obviously have a much simpler payment mechanism to all of its suppliers. The shame there is that, I think Pakistan has started to develop, also has a quasi-protected currency, has started to allow on a smaller level, perhaps a limit of $10,000 capital to open a subsidiary abroad. And what worries me is not just the intellectual property, but the export. So right now we're looking at foreign exchange reserve depletion.
Right.
And because of all the factors I've said about industrial revolutions, Nepal is unlikely to have a big manufacturing export sector. We are likely to have a major technology export sector. And the problem is you can't export that if you can't realistically make regular online payments. And so I feel if the central bank were to allow, in a limited way, subsidiaries abroad so that those profits are booked in Nepal.
Right.
I think that's the important thing, that ultimately the profits consolidate up to Nepal, add to the GDP and add to the export. If you force Nepali companies to somehow, they have a brother abroad, you set up a holding company, of course, the majority of the profits are booked abroad. And so that doesn't count for Nepal's export figures. So I feel if there could be some innovation there, that would be really important. That said, this is not sort of crazy stuff. There are limitations on the outflow of foreign capital because they need to defend the peg. And you see that even more important in this period.
Right, because since we work in the space of innovation, and sometimes we create a kind of a prototype, right? So because we have been working for, let's say, 6 months, coming up with idea, and framing that idea into prototype, and then I remember one thing what we did was we came up with a board game, right? Because in Nepal we just have good Ludo and Snake and Ladders, and since we work with children, we thought about what about making a game so interesting that they learn from the process, from the gamification, and they enjoy, they get entertainment and they get empowered. So we're like, okay, now we got our board game, right? So, and then we went for the registration and they were like, why are you guys here? Right? It's just a game, right? So because we really want to protect our creations. So since you have been working quite a lot around IP and commercialization in other countries as well, like Malaysia and other places. So how do you see this thing? Is it getting better, or in which area Nepal need to focus, especially the policymakers?
To be honest, I am no expert on Nepal's IP protection legally. So I can't comment whether it's good, bad. What I do know is that every company, wherever they are, will always register patents in the US, the EU. So you really need a mechanism by which you can have foreign entities that can register those to get international protection, because it's unlikely that the theft of intellectual property in Nepal is going to make a huge difference. It's going to be defending that internationally that's important. So I'm afraid I'm not really an expert on the Nepali IP protection.
I think that really gives us answer, because IP is something which is really important, and I think there's a growing understanding around okay, this is an intellectual property. It's like the physical property, right? So infringing intellectual property is also similar to you are stealing something from someone physically. So I think that thing is getting there. So I think we can talk about that later. But since we are talking about innovation, and this is something we work around, and you have been investing quite a lot in the innovative companies, I was wondering, how do you see the innovation scene in Nepal? How is the climate from an investor perspective? Are companies becoming more innovative? Are young people coming up with more innovative ideas? Because you have been having almost 2 decades of experience around, investing in these cool stuffs.
Sure. The big surprise for us is, if you look at our pipeline when we started, it was hydro plants, hospitals, physical businesses. Right. Manufacturing of pharmaceuticals is one of our investments. But fast forward 8 years, the biggest allocation of investment is in tech.
Right.
And so I've talked about Fuse Machines and Cloud Factories, Sasta Deal, more recently Upaya City Cargo, Food Mandu. So that takes up, the biggest chunk out of our 3 sectors, which are energy, healthcare, and technology. And the reason for that is the quality of the entrepreneurs, the quality of the business plans. And I feel that just like technology is borderless, so is the culture of entrepreneurship. And with that culture of entrepreneurship, and as success gets closer and more tangible. So, right. You've only got to look over the border at India for an incredible venture capital market with enough entrepreneurs which have made it, sold their shares, IPO'd. And then you have deals here. Cloud Factory achieved an amazing transaction, raised $65 million in 2019. With 4,000 people working there, word gets around. You can touch success. And so people themselves naturally start to think about what are the factors of being a successful entrepreneur. So I think not gone, but much rarer do I hear the story of the parents paid for a degree and you've got to be a doctor or an engineer, right? Still, that is desirable. Yeah. But, I want to go and work for a startup. I want to be a venture capitalist. I want to, do something that nobody had ever heard of a few years ago. I think that's becoming more and more common. So that culture of entrepreneurship is flying across borders, just like the technology that supports it.
I think that's brilliant. And now talking about private sector, because, we being in the humanitarian sector, we always want to learn from the private sector. So you being an investor in private sector, especially, not just talking about profit, but people and planet and, everything. Yes, you said the number comes first, but at the same time, you are looking into the social benefits as well, right? So for a humanitarian sector like ours, what are something we can learn from private sector so that we remain more efficient, we remain more agile, and we remain more innovative?
Well, I think private sector has the beauty of numerical accountability. Right. It's if you take us as a fund manager, so we raise money from large international banks, funds in Europe, the US, multilaterals, and they will entrust money with us for a period of 10 years, and they will tell us what success looks like. I can't go back in the middle of that and say, oh, I'm really sorry there was an earthquake, or I'm really sorry the government delayed my license. These are risks that we should have factored in. And if we don't make a certain return, we will have not been successful. And if we do make a certain return, we will have been successful. And so that's entirely measurable and accountable. It's on me, it's on my partners, it's on my team. And that's just one example. Of course, any business runs like that. You can measure success. In the non-profit sector, it's much more difficult to have that kind of accountability and numerical measure of success or failure. I do think where the two blend, now we have worked with DFID. When we started up, we got a grant from DFID to help us understand how could we set up a private equity fund that invests in Nepal. It's never been done before.
Right.
So there were expensive lawyers, consultants, tax accountants, etc. And we published our findings, but we were able to use that knowledge. So anybody else could have used that knowledge. Now, that was a great example of where non-profit money helped. So if you think about the amount of money, I won't say how much it is, but it was a very small amount of money.
Okay.
And now what are we doing? We're managing $87 million. We've got 10,000 employees in our portfolio companies, and that is sustainable, right? So herein lies a fundamental difference between a classic NGO project, I will fund a healthcare project,
right,
and the budget will run out, versus I will fund and stimulate a private equity fund, which could then stimulate an ecosystem, and I hope that we've in part helped to do that, that will employ thousands of people, and unless those businesses go bust, they will continue forever in perpetuity to employ 10,000, hopefully more and more people. So you can see that sustainable prosperity, I think that's the word. So the interesting thing is I can see the NGO sector moving and locking hands in the way that DFID did with us in the early days. And I think that is the holy grail where the two should meet.
Absolutely, because one of the things we really are trying to focus is around sustainability, and I think private sector plays a massive role in this one, right? Because for our typical projects, we do the project and it finishes and we hand over to the government. But I think we're experimenting around it. We are also trying to be more innovative and basically borrowing things from the private sectors. Just to give you an example around, like what we did with one of the challenges what Nepali public schools are facing, especially children, are around the learning achievement, right? Because they do not have good access to quality reading materials. And that's something we realized, and we're like, how can we solve this? Right? So there must be ideas. Somebody might have solved similar kind of problem somewhere. And then we realized, Amazon did that with their books, right? So, and then we realized, okay, what about we create e-commerce like platform, for example, something what you have already invested in, right? So marketplace, so that all of a sudden the publishers can publish their book there and they can sell book from the platform. The schools in the rural community can see, we have got so many books which we can access, and they can order online and get those books delivered at their school. So these are some of the things what we have been learning from the private sectors, and also trying to participate and partner with the private sector. And the Holy Grail is all about sustainability, I guess.
I think you've already mentioned one of the best social impacts from the private sector in credit scoring, and you don't have to look any further than India to see an astonishing amount of innovation. Now, in Nepal, those ideas, especially without the sort of the government tech digital identification platform which the government has developed, it's much harder for startups to replicate that. But what's the social good? It's bringing rural people, women, the unbanked into the formal banking system. It's giving them a credit score where they don't have. In the West, in Britain, fintech is much less of a big deal because we've had banking apps and tap our phones to pay for years.
True.
We've had that infrastructure.
Absolutely.
The opportunity now is to use this more flexible technology to leapfrog that and include people in the formal banking and finance system. In Nepal, how can where that is so risky because there isn't a government platform to build on, how can the equivalent of sort of a grant, perhaps mixed, can take some of that risk? There will be some failures. There are failures and successes in every investment portfolio. True. But I think, that word blended finance, whether that's blended finance in a early stage venture capital type investment, or whether it's blended finance in a later stage green bond type investment. I think that is the most interesting area of innovation where the for-profit and non-profit capital meets.
Perfect. So since this episode is all about the theme of investing in innovation, and we have with a perfect guest like you coming and talking about investing in all this cool, innovative ventures. So how do you see the next 10 years of your next journey of investing in innovation? I understand there's the second round of fund which has opened, right? So how do you see, like, okay, because you are an investor, you have been looking at all the emerging technologies, constantly updating yourself, trying to learn about AI, machine learning, whatever you have to learn, and then trying to see, okay, this is somewhere it's worth taking a risk. This is where I want to make an impact, right? So 10 years, it's going to be more complicated, more complex, new technologies coming. So investing in innovation in next 10 years.
Yeah, these markets are moving so fast. First to say, it is cool. I mean, I do actually love what I do, not just the tech stuff. In everything we do, investing in Nepal is fun. Perhaps I'm a particular type of person. I think it's fun because I touched upon the people.
Right.
And even if it's very frustrating bureaucracy, the people are probably really nice. They're stuck in a system. So I do enjoy what I do. I enjoy particularly the tech stuff because of the employment potential, because of the potential for the technologies themselves to help, the unbanked, for example. 10 years from now, I have no idea. What I can tell you is that we will continue to invest in both of those sectors. What I mean by that is consumer facing in Nepal. That could be e-commerce, delivery, food mandu, could be fintech. And we will also continue to invest in the innovations in AI, other things where Nepali brains and talent who can stay in Nepal but can export to other countries. I think some of the trends we can see is if you look at e-commerce companies and Sastadil and Food Mandu, Daraj, etc. How much are they going to continue to provide their own logistics? And I think to an extent they need to, because it's mission critical. You have to have a certain base of delivery drivers, vans, bikes, etc. But I think what we're seeing more and more is Upaya City Cargo being a third-party logistics that can really focus on the training, the health and safety, the actual mechanics and technology of efficient logistics delivery, is making it more and more blended. So what you'll see, an e-commerce company may start in a new, smaller city, and it may use Upaya's services. It will pay a variable rate as opposed to carry fixed costs on the books. So I think the development of logistics is critical to all of this new, because Nepal, this new technology, delivery is essential. Now, Nepal's delivery costs are high, and there are two factors going into that. One are the quality of roads, the lack of railways, that that's not going to be fixed anytime soon. But what you can do is make delivery more efficient. You can aggregate. You can make sure that each truck that goes from A to B has a 90% utilization instead of a 30% utilization. Right. So you can use these aggregate technologies to drive down the cost of delivery. I also think that cold storage is going to have to come into some of these logistics companies. So the ability to distribute medicines quickly and reliably and cheaply, perishable food items, etc., is going to be an important factor.
I think that's brilliant, because when you're talking about cold storage and the supply chain, then we often because we play with all the crazy ideas, right, being in the space of innovation. So we're looking into how blockchain can be really important in a country like Nepal, because we are talking about the transparency, we are talking about the efficiency and those kind of things. At the same time, cold storage, we looked into some of the local innovators who are trying to create flat pack kind of storage, which you can take it to the mountains, which are more cheaper than refrigerator that just works very low watt solar panel, and they have got this nice sensors and stuff. So I think something really exciting is brewing up, and I'm sure in the next 10 years we can see all these cool things happening. And thanks so much for being today in our Stories of Innovation episode 1, and we really enjoyed, talking to you, hearing so many inspiring stories about like how Dolma Impact Fund came into existence, what was the inspiration behind it, and getting your expertise in the show. So this is amazing. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.